Greetings, world, and welcome back to another episode of the NeuroWellness Project, a podcast devoted to exploring compassionate and evidence-informed approaches to autism. In the search for healing, many people find themselves cycling through endless treatments, protocols, and diagnoses, yet still feeling like something essential is missing. What if the missing piece isn't another supplement or lab test, but a new way of seeing the body altogether? Today, we are entering the world of bioenergetics. The bioenergetic perspective is at the intersection of energy, biology, and consciousness. This approach invites us to look beyond chemistry and structure into the invisible networks that organize life, energy, and the information fields that guide every function of the body. The idea is that when these fields are disrupted, symptoms arise. And when they're brought back into balance, the body's innate intelligence can finally do what it was designed to do: heal. I am being joined today by Mary Coyle, an internationally recognized expert in the fields of homotoxicology and bioregulatory therapeutics. For over 3 decades, Mary has worked at bringing this advanced energetic model into modern clinical practice, helping her clients to uncover and correct energetic imbalances deep within the quantum field. Mary is going to help us understand how bioregulatory therapeutics bridges the gap between body and field, and why this approach may hold the key to understanding not disease, but the deeper intelligence that animates life itself. And I am so excited to be joined now by Mary Coyle. Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. I am looking forward to this because this is the first time that I've been able to find a guest for this show who could speak to the more bioenergetic perspective of healing. Super excited to have you. So I wanted to ask you first, what is it that drew you to this approach? Like your story of how you got involved in homotoxicology and bioregulatory therapeutics.
Well, doesn't it seem like it with many of us that are going outside the box, there was a child involved. So I had been in the chemical industry and I was exposed to a lot of pesticides, a lot of fine particulate. I was on a lot of construction sites, and I was always concerned when I was pregnant that what I was exposed to would affect the baby. And so I spoke to my father and my grandfather and my doctors, and nobody seemed that concerned about it. This is back in the early 90s. You know, everything is EPA approved, and there just wasn't there wasn't a red flag. I think that people didn't really know what to say to me about it because there wasn't any studies really done. So when he was born, he was very fussy, very constipated, had a lot of ear infections from 2 months old to about 2 years old. It wasn't really developing language, really fussy, developing rashes, just uncomfortable. He was just a miserable little baby. And so I started going down the path of the biochemical route, and I worked with Dr. Baker, who sort of started the whole DAN movement that segued into MAPS, right?
Yes.
And then he made some progress getting him off the foods that he was sensitive to, getting him on a few supplements, getting him off of milk, getting him off of gluten. But I still felt like there was something that was stuck. And I had done a lot of labs at that time, and I saw there was a lot of heavy metals coming out in his hair, in his blood, in his urine. I also saw a lot of fungus and yeast, the organic acids test. So I just picked up a book in my office that said toxicology on it, and I started reading that book. And they had the people that are toxic had the same responses as my son, where IQ decrements, sleep issues, anorexia, constipation, anxiety. And so I just kind of put the word autism aside, and I just thought, I'm gonna work on getting these toxins out.
Wow.
And that's how I accidentally found homotoxicology. I was getting a little newsletter from Patty Lemmer that had the developmentally delayed registry, And that
Mm-hmm.
segued also into Beth Lampert taking it over, and that's Documenting Hope and Epidemic Answers. So she had a little newsletter. This is really before the internet was up and running, that talked about, there's a little advertisement that said, I have homeopathic nutraceuticals that are designed to get toxins out without negatively impacting the active immunity. And
Wow.
so he was very smart not to use the word homeopathy. Because in our family, if you said the word acupuncture, if you said the word chiropractor, you just, you had to apologize to my dad, especially. Those quacks. I go to court against those quacks. So if I knew it was homeopathy, I would have. But those little pills, that cost $5 at the health food store, no. So but I like the idea that it didn't impact the active immunity, so it wasn't going to hurt him. And it was designed to get the toxins out. So I just thought, what the heck? I'm going to call this pharmacist down in Florida and pick his brain and see if he's crazy, see if he knows what he's talking about. So I called him up, and he knew what he was talking about. And I just thought,
Whoa.
wow, I'm like super excited about this. Like this guy, it took me years to really back engineer what he was talking about, really understand it. But by then I understood intracellular toxicity. I understand mitochondrial dysfunction because of intracellular toxicity. And that was sort of what he was looking at, getting toxins out of the cell and bringing up the mitochondria, getting up the energy so that the body can then express all these toxins and have it come out through an emotory. So that's when I was working with a neurologist. He was sort of a holistic neurologist in New York City. And on his bottle of the mitochondrial support was alpha-poloic acid and CoQ10 and um, glutathione and cytochrome 450. And I knew a little bit about mitochondrial supports because I was trying to do that on the biochemical level.
Yes.
But my son's gut was so bad. I mean, he was just having bowel movements where he wasn't even breaking his food down, let alone, this world of supplements that I'm trying to, manipulate his biochemistry, right?
Yes.
So I saw what was on there. I showed the doctor. He's like, yeah, he's got all the right ingredients. Let's give it a shot. So I didn't know it was homeopathy. I just thought it was like a liquid vitamin. And I just immediately started seeing improvements. But then, as a mom, you always think this is in my head, or, it's magical thinking. I want this to work so badly. And so I took it to two of my girlfriends that also had kids that were on the spectrum the same age. And I said, will you guys try this? Let me know what you think. And sure enough, after a day or two, they called me back, and both of them, and they said, we really think there's something to this. So then I called back Dr. Kratz, and I said, well, how do I know this is working? And he says,
Mm-hmm.
well, it's really easy. He goes, just do your own tests, do your own lab tests, go find a doctor, and what you should see is when you put the energy into the cells and the body starts to move the toxins out, it's going to go into the blood. That's your conduit of elimination. So see what's coming out in the blood. Do it yourself. Is there yeast coming out? Is there bacteria coming out? Is there heavy metals coming out? He says,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately, when the toxins get out of the cells, the DNA repair enzymes of our body, the little catfish that clip out the mutations of our nucleotides in our DNA and resequence them properly, those can come in and start fixing things. So not only do you want to see what's coming out, but you want to see what's being fixed. He says, so look at his CBC, his complete blood count. Look at his immune panel. Look at his metabolic profile. That should get better. He says, because just think, if you have healthy cells, they divide to make tissues, they make organs, and they make systems. So you want that to look good. Don't worry what comes out, because it's coming out. The stool's going to reflect what's coming out. The urine's going to reflect what's coming out. So I did do that because I didn't really have anybody to talk to about this. I never knew anybody who'd done this. I didn't know any doctors that were doing this or any parents. So it was all on theory, right? So, but then I was seeing it play out in the labs too. As he's getting better and better, the labs were reflecting that. And then I was still in the chemical industry, and people were calling me up saying, "Oh, I saw your son at school." And he was barely talking 6 months ago, and now he's putting words together. He came up. He wants, my son to have a play date with him. What are you doing? So I
Cool.
would say, oh, well, I'm working with this guy, and this is the idea behind it, and you can pick these products up. And so after about 8 years, I had so many people calling me up that was when I decided that I better start segueing over and doing this full time. So that was about the year 2000 that I got out of the other job, and for the most part. And then I started doing this full time, and I've been doing it ever since, working with parents, sharing my story, explaining how this model of homotoxicology, works. And it's been really exciting and wonderful to see some of the progress that the kids have made.
Wow. Thank you so much. And if you don't mind me asking, where's your son today? How's he doing?
He's 34. When I started doing the protocol with him, he was almost 5, and he said, everybody always asks me that, right? Because we have to compare, the kids with the kids that made progress. But he was in a 40-hour ABA school. He could say his wants, right, with a lot of prompting. I want juice, I want milk, I want bus, I want go. And then when we started doing this program, and we also did sublingual immunotherapy, so we looked not just at the foods but the phenolics, and we desensitized him with a wonderful naturopathic doctor named Dr. Caprio. So the idea of homotoxicology is to get the stress out of the body. So you don't want to be putting foods in that are stressing them out. It's everything, right? The etiology of disease is inflammation, so they say. So that was helping. And then, and the ABA then started working better and better too, because now his body's working better, and he's now holding on to the gains and making really beautiful progress. So he was in a school that was across the street from a parochial school, and he started transitioning when he was 5 to the parochial school. So after 2 years, by the time he was 7, we held him back a year. He had made the full transition into first grade, but he was 7 years old. But he had those were many years of him being blocked, right?
Yes.
So he was learning language like a foreign language, and he was memorizing everything. So, you could probably drop him off, at the park, 3 miles away, and he could make his way back.
Yes.
But, you ask him about, what'd you think about dinner tonight? What do you think about this dinner tonight? He looks at you like you got 3 heads. Like, he's not giving you that answer. So he was memorizing his way through school, because they're really good with math computation. They're good with numbers, right? So he was hanging in there, but he was really learning language in chunk phrases. So it was very disordered. I even remember at 9 years old, he would say, "Get me my dress," and we just thought that was so cute. But, prepositions and conjugated verbs and pronouns, I mean, those always change. The number one's always a number one, the color red's always red, and a bus is always a bus. But sometimes I'm a me, sometimes I'm a she, sometimes I'm an I. It's like, wow, this is a confusing. So yeah, so he made it he made it through the school, and then he graduated from the parochial school, but his language was still that was still a struggle. Then we put him in a school that was for more speech impaired children in high school, and then we put him into but he got a high school diploma, and then he went to a program in Canada called the Aerosmith program, which is a Canadian program that literally looks like they really do an amazing job at looking at what's going on in your brain, and then they have exact programming to get the things connected. So like one of the programs is he's got his eye covered and he's tracing, and I'm like, what's that? They all look like little pirates in his classroom. And they said that it's actually hitting the prefrontal cortex, and it'll help with expressive language. And I'm thinking, this is so crazy, patching the eye and tracing. But when he, right, it was just like, it was so amazing what Barbara Aerosmith figured out. This program's 70 years old with a ton of science behind it. So this is not fringe at all. And it's embedded in 35 schools in Canada, and it's embedded in, I don't know, around 15 schools in the United States. So So that program was a game changer. So well, just to give you an example, like he went up to Canada, I dropped him off. I found a family that, took in foreign students. I couldn't believe I was leaving my son by himself up in Canada with a family that I never met. So, but we did it. He came back at Thanksgiving and he was watching Harry Potter. And I'm like, why are you watching Harry Potter? You've never been interested in those movies. You always want to watch Transformers or the Cars movies. And he looked at me and goes, because now I understand it. So his expressive language, his understanding, and again, it isn't like an enrichment program. It's really like a medical program. I mean, they work with the NFL with traumatic brain injury. The Aerosmith program does, and they're in Canada, they're in Australia, they're here. They're just not. It's not. Again, there's just so many good things out there, but not people know about them, right? So then he came back to the United States after 2 years of 6 hours a day of brain rehab and an hour and a half of homework. So it's not, for the weak of heart. It's a big deal. But it was in Canada, so it was super affordable, really affordable. There's no way I could afford that kind of therapy in the United States. I mean, no way.
Yeah.
So he went and he got his associate's degree at a community college in New York, and he didn't have any tutors, which was the first for us. He was able
Whoa.
to get through it. He got a 3.0, and then he decided he wanted to get into computers, so he started kind of taking some computer courses, and then he decided he wants to do social work. So now he is working with people with adults with neurodiversity, and he's a life coach, and he wants to go back to school and look into becoming a licensed social worker. So that's a long explanation, but there's 34 years behind that explanation.
My God, thank you so much. That alone is just such an amazing and inspiring story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So let's dive into now like how your approach differs from like the conventional approaches. So for all of our listeners out there, we have today like the dominant model of medicine is something that we call allopathic medicine. So it's centered around disease and like managing symptoms of disease. And that's kind of how our mainstream medical systems operate. There's also like more functional approaches, which we've covered through a few different guests on the show so far. And functional approaches involve looking into and addressing imbalances, usually like nutrient imbalances and things of that nature, and then kind of addressing it that way. So, Mary, how does like the bioregulatory approach differ from these other approaches?
That is a very good question. Back in Germany, they created sort of a healing uh, continuum, right? So, the goal for all of us is to function the best we can. And then kind of underneath that is structure. So making sure our body is structurally okay. Chiropractics, exercise, weightlifting, even rolfing and deep tissue massage. And then the next layer down that you want to address is the biochemical. So you want to look, if magnesium, if my son had constipation, or low D, you want to give D3, K2,
Mhm.
all the things to kind of support the body on that level. Food is on the biochemical level, medications are on the biochemical level.
Mhm.
But there's this deeper level that they figured out, you know, 50, 70 years ago. And that's that bioenergetic level.
Yeah.
So, underneath all these, molecules that are swimming around, if we go a little bit deeper, we go into the atoms, and underneath that we go into, probabilities and waves. And then underneath that we are in quantum fields. So quantum fields is sort of probably where bioenergetic medicine is working. Acupuncture probably, works along that. Laser treatments would kind of work along that level. But it's using signals to trigger the body that toxins are in there. That's kind of what drainage remedies are all about. So the way like a drainage remedy is made, and they're usually low potency. So they're going to increase the metabolism and the circulation of whatever organ system you're addressing, whether it's the liver or the kidney or the adrenals or the thyroid or the extracellular matrix, which is sort of the mesh that holds all of our organs and cells together. So it's taking an herb like, solidago, which is a kidney drainer, and then
Mhm.
they put it in 9 parts of alcohol, and then they shake it, they succuss it, and then they take 1 part of that and they put it in 9 parts of alcohol and they succuss it. That's a 2x, so 1 to 10. And then
Mhm.
you keep going, and once they kind of keep it low potency so that it doesn't go past a 200x on the bottle, and they say in general that anything greater than 212x frequency is intracellular. So it's
Mm.
not, the drainers aren't detoxifiers. They really do just drain. They put energy into the liver, to the kidney, and then it allows the body, gives the body the strength and energy to then remove it. So
Yeah.
I always think of bioenergetic, that bioenergetic piece is getting the grease off the walls so that everything's sticking better, so that
Mm.
your food is breaking down better, that your drugs, if you're on meds, are working better. Your supplements, instead of taking all these supplements and all these herbs, and then they end up, their liver can't break it down, and they end up having expensive urine, and it doesn't really maximize those different layers. So then the biochemical level is going to work better, the structural level is going to work better, and the functional level will work better.
Yes.
So it just makes all those things work so much better, because if your body is working at 60%, you're only going to get a 60% bang for your buck on those other levels. But if we can
Hmm.
get the body working at 100%, the speech therapy is going to work at 100%, and the OT is going to work at 100%, and the food's going to work at 100%, and the D3K2 will work at 100%. So that's kind of the idea behind it. When you have really weak individuals with intracellular toxins, their bodies can't break down food very well, let alone all those supplements, what you're trying to do on the biochemical level. But if you have vibration, your body doesn't do any work. It doesn't need to do any work. The remedies are doing the work for you. So it's just putting the energy in, and then the body gets to make its own decision. Oh, that's a drainer for the liver. Well, let me get some energy. And what's this yeast doing in here? And then the body says, well, it doesn't belong here. And then the body gently moves it out. So it's really deep acting, but it's also extremely safe. And it's really nice with little kids, and their bodies are really compromised, that they have that opportunity their bodies can make those decisions on what and when they want to get rid of, pathogens or xenobiotics.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much. May I ask you, does homotoxicology work on like a sympathetic approach, kind of like a like for like kind of level? Is that how it works?
Yeah, exactly. That's how it is. So bioregulatory medicine is the big umbrella, but the model of disease evolution is homotoxicology. Okay. So Dr. Reckeweg, back in 1952, he was the German physician that realized that this planet's getting so toxic, and people are getting really sick from, poor sewage, or poor sanitation, from, too much, mercury in the air, from the chemical revolution. And he was using classical homeopathics, but he wasn't getting the bang for his buck that he thought Hahnemann was getting with classical homeopathy 300 years ago. So he said, well, let me just use the model of like cures like to trigger the body to get the toxins out. So instead of using one remedy, one potency, he used a whole bunch of different constituents in one bottle and a whole bunch of different potencies. And it's really just designed per indication of trying to get toxins out. So, for instance, like the products I worked with Dr. Kratz, who created this product line called HVS, there would be a bottle, and on the bottle it would say heavy metal. And in the bottle, you would see it says lead, beryllium, cadmium, mercury, aluminum, antimony. But on the frequencies, it's a 15x to a 200x. So you've got all these different frequencies of every single heavy metal. Now, anything greater than a 6x frequency, meaning that particular original tincture has been diluted and shaken 6 times, that means that that original ingredient or those original ingredients have been diluted to 1 part per million. By the time it's a 9x, it's 1 part per billion. And by the time it's, I think, a 12x, or I think it's 12x, it's past that Avogadro's number where there are not any molecules left actually in the original ingredient. So the water is the medium that's shaken, or the alcohol is the medium that's shaken. It somehow picks up the imprint of the lead, beryllium, cadmium, mercury, aluminum. So we're not drinking heavy metal, toxic metal. We probably have more heavy metal in our drinking water than we would in any of those products. But we're drinking the frequencies because everything has a signature frequency. And it's going to go into the cell, into the DNA, into the mitochondria, and it'll start to probably vibrate and alert that immune system. The stuff is in there, and there's probably red flags. This is just how I conceptualize this in my theory. The red flags alert your immune system, and your immune system, with 3 billion years of evolution designed to survive, says, wow, what's this mercury doing in here? What's this aluminum doing in here? That doesn't belong. So the body, in its own infinite wisdom, will start mobilizing it out on its own. I mean, I just can't believe this guy figured this out. You know what I mean? Like, it's so great. I mean, it works so well, and it's so little, and it's just so not understood in the United States.
Yes, because it feels so counterintuitive. So, I mean, we're talking about, like micro doses, right? We're not talking about, like you said, drinking a cup of like lead water, like that's not what we're doing at all. And I think it feels counterintuitive just because how our systems are kind of constructed around us now. I know I'm a clinical herbalist, right? And a lot of the time, especially when we're dealing with like acute illnesses and ailments and things like that, we will go in with like an antipathetic approach. So like if it's hot, cool it off, right? If it's moist, we're going to want to dry it out. If it's tonic, we're going to want to relax it. So kind of that's just how the human mind, I think, works. So that's why these approaches just fascinate me, because like how does that work? It's really relying on like that innate intelligence of nature. I think not just of the human body, like that innate intelligence of nature. And I think it like I said, it sounds very counterintuitive, but here's an example that I always use for like using like for like. It was maybe 2 summers ago. My husband had a really persistent case of pink eye, right? Would not go away. He tried everything, even like the steroids they were giving him, the antibiotic drops, nothing was helping. And then finally, from one of my teachers, I was re-listening to a lecture, and he said, if you're ever in a situation like this, like put a tiny little bit of cayenne in water and wash the eye with cayenne. So you're looking at this eye and it's red and it's hot and it's inflamed, and you're like, I'm going to put cayenne like in my eye. And when I tell you he did that, and the next day he woke up after 2 weeks of antibiotics and it was gone. It was amazing. So we don't know how it works, but it works. Like just totally fascinating.
It is, but yeah, I mean, you're right. It's working exactly on that same level. But you're right. You need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, right now, please do not go putting cayenne pepper in your eyes. Don't go drinking heavy metals. This is in no way a replacement for consultation with a licensed and certified medical professional.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
back to what you're saying about the herbal piece.
Yes.
That's so important. There's a lot of kids have what they call pandas or pans, which I'm sure most of your audience understands what that is.
Mm-hmm.
So when with some of the children, or Lyme disease too, that's very common, right? And mycoplasma. Once I kind of do my piece with the drainage and the intracellular detox, I often refer them to either an herbalist or a naturopathic doctor that's really well versed in the herbs, because now they're strong enough to actually work on the biochemical level, and you can really target stuff. You're getting that body working really well, and now you can, instead of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, because the body's so compromised. Now that you can really get far with those treatments, and then you can get further with, the I like the PX docs. I really do. I'm really impressed with that therapy, which is sort of like a neurological chiropractics. But they hold and they really build on what they can do. But speech therapy that then starts to work better, and ABA and all the other things, the rehab stuff that you're doing works so much better. But I'm a huge fan of herbals. Big, huge, really big fan.
Thank you. Me too. It definitely it got me to where I am today. So that I have PCOS also. So interesting, they say that a lot of women with PCOS, especially when they have their first child, that child ends up on the autism spectrum. So yeah, I think that's kind of like maybe like is the word transgenerational that I want to use, how the toxins kind of travel through the generations. So, and that's so interesting that you came from the chemical industry. I'm in New Jersey, and big pharma family. Going back, like my grandfather, all four of their children went into STEM. So hats off to you for being like, the cycle breaker who's kind of like figuring all of this out. I think so important, and thank you. Sorry for the segue.
All the stuff that you felt figured out too, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff to figure out. We all have to do this together.
Yes, exactly. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about extracellular matrix and the role of extracellular matrix in health.
Yeah, I never heard of the extracellular matrix until I started learning about homotoxicology, and it really made a lot of sense to me. I conceptualized that when the toxins are going in and building up in the system, in the organs, in the tissues, the cell to cell communication, there's a transmission area that goes all the way through. Like we have to go, we have to urinate. We get this message from our urinary bladder to our brain, or how to ride a bike. Our arms and our legs have to talk to our brain. But if that transmission is really full of toxins, then the communication's going to be slow, right? So like I'll talk to, like with my son, the potty training was kind of slow, and I just thought, well, how come he can't figure this out? Can't he feel the wet diaper? Isn't that bothering him? And
Yes.
I don't think that he could. And then
Yeah.
when we started working with Dr. Kratz and started detoxing and getting all the toxins out, then the next thing you know, he's taking his diaper off that's wet because now it's bothering him. It's like now
Whoa.
the information is coming in. And then
Wow.
we were able to then get into the potty training after that. Or even riding a scooter. Like he would hold the scooter, he'd put his feet on the scooter, and I would push him. But he didn't know to steer or to pedal with his foot. And when I started detoxing him with Dr. Kratz, all of a sudden it's kind of like eureka. Oh, I pedal and I steer. So I just think that that's huge. Or even on a swing, he'd sit there on a swing like a bag of potatoes. And he
Yes.
didn't know how to, move his arms and his legs. And the next thing you know, he's learning how to do that. So I just don't think they're getting the information when all those toxins are in that extracellular matrix. The other problem with a toxic extracellular matrix is that the cells are buttressing up against the extracellular matrix. So if that's full of toxins, it's going to attach onto the cell, and then it's going to make the cell membrane really hard and rigid. It's going to make it's going to make the cell, sick. And what do we need for energy? We need nutrition to get into the cell. We need, the mitochondria to do its job, and then we need the metabolic waste to come out. But if it's hard and rigid, how's that nutrition going to get in, and how's that metabolic waste going to come out, right? So once, there's a lot of drainage remedies in the world of homotoxicology, and there's a lot of different companies that make drainage remedies. There's Energetics and Marco Pharma. There's Feel, um, Pecana, Unda. So all of them usually will have a couple of drainage remedies that will address that, and they'll also do a lymph drainer. That's a big part of homotoxicology, because you think of your lymph system as kind of your garbage collectors that are sort of sporadically, throughout your body. So
Hmm.
you want to clean those out, and then you kind of, the way that they explained it with the teaching is go with the primary pathways first, and then you go to the secondary pathways next. And usually, if your primary pathways become unblocked, the secondary pathways don't need to do a lot of work. So with my son having a primary pathway that was blocked as an infant, so he's constipated, the toxins are trying to find a way out and they can't get out efficiently. So he starts to use his ears. So now he's getting an ear infection and I, go to the doctor and I give him some antibiotics and then a couple of weeks later he's crying and he has another ear infection and I give him another antibiotic and then the rashes start to come, secondary pathway of elimination. So I'm blocking all the vehicles and areas where he can get the toxins out. So what happens? Then the toxins start to go into the tissues and the organs, they get into the extracellular matrix, and now they're going into the cell. So it's kind of like you see these kids, you feel like your child, there's a boat that's sinking. Like you don't
Yes.
know what's happening, but it feels like it's loading up with sand and it's really slowly, slowly, slowly sinking. It isn't overnight usually. It's kind of like, wasn't he waving, a month ago, or wasn't he saying mom, babbling? He's so quiet. Or why isn't he playing with his trains? Why is he just lining up videos? But they're still there and they still look at you sometimes and smile and whatever. And you just think it's sort of surreal that they're sort of kidnapped one little piece at a time. And when you bring them back, they come back one little teeny piece at a time. They don't come back all at once either, because the inflammation has to go down and the neurons have to make those reconnect those again.
Wow. Thank you so much. So that was kind of my next question. In your experience, not just with your son, but in the other children who you work with, what are some of those like first signs that the drainage is working? Because I know that healing looks a lot different than just kind of like the allopathic putting a band-aid over something. So what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, it's you think about it when the body's really toxic and then you're starting to move these toxins out, the enzymatic, all the enzymes start to kick in. Like, whoa. The body's like, wait a minute, what is going on? The metabolic system starts to wake up.
Yes.
And and so things start to move. And you could have loose stools, you can have parasites coming out in the stool. Again, you're not going after necessarily anything in particular. You might not be going
Hmm.
after parasite detox, but just putting energy in, the body knows that those parasites shouldn't be in there, or the yeast shouldn't be in there. So you just put a little bit of drainage in, and you could have these yellow orange stools, and that could be yeast coming out. But again, the beautiful thing is the body's making all those decisions. It's going to get rid of what it's capable of getting rid of, and it's going to keep going deeper and deeper, getting probably rid of more insidious toxins as it gets stronger and stronger. So that's just it's such an interesting thing. But for everybody, the parents that call me up that want to work with me, usually their first question is, I want him to speak. I want him to speak more if he has some language, right? That's I want him to talk to me or her to talk to me. And so if it's a little kid, like a 3 or a 2-year old, my first question is, can that child jump with 2 feet? And there's something about 3 dimension and language that if they don't have 3 dimension, language does not come in. I don't know why, I'd like to talk to somebody, neurologist about that, or I don't know, maybe the PX docs, I can talk to them about it. But so I'll have to say, well, they have to jump with 2 feet, usually if the language is going to come in. The other thing too is that, speaking is a fine motor skill. You have to use a lot of coordination, right? You have to, use your breath, you got to use vocal cords, you got to move your mouth, you got to move your tongue, your lips. We take speaking for granted, but it's a very complicated mechanism. So, my next question is, can they blow a kiss, or can they kiss? Because a lot of them they have those little wet lips and they just kind of go, and they're like, no, he doesn't know how to pucker, he can't pucker. Or can he blow bubbles? No, he can't do that. Can he blow his nose? I'm like, well, how's he going to learn? How's he going to talk, or she's going to talk if she can't even, or he can't even figure that out?
Yes.
Just think, the word moo. I mean, think of all that has to go into just making that sound. So, that's what I'll say to the parents, like, are they jumping? Are they trying to make a smacking sound? Are they blowing bubbles? Are they babbling more? Are they using different kinds of sounds when they babble?
Yes.
So that's healing again looks kind of strange. You're taking something that's locked and now you're shifting it, and so maybe a child will wake up every single night at 1 o'clock in the morning. But now the parents are saying, well, now it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, but that's good. It's shifting. It's getting, whatever's going on, something's moving in the right direction. Because we always have to assume this is the right direction. Um, Pointing, can you see out? Are the neurons making connections? The kids, their sensory system opens up, so they start to lick food, smell food. They might not eat the food because a lot of them have such a memory of a psychological worry of gut pain that they're afraid to eat different foods. But when their enzymes free up, all of a sudden they're looking at food and it looks good to them. They might be afraid of it, but that's sort of the first step of their diet opening up. With the kids that are a little bit older, let's say like I have a 6-year-old, if I'm talking to the mom and she wants to know, what are we going to see? We put some energy in. That one of my questions might be, have they lost any teeth? And they'll say, no, we haven't. He hasn't lost any teeth. So, to lose teeth, you have to form permanent teeth, and those baby teeth, it takes a certain amount of energy. But if you have intracellular toxins and your body's working at 60%, you're not going to waste that 60% on forming permanent teeth and pushing them down. You're not going to use that 60% to grow fast toenails. You're not going to use that 60% to talk, to say hello. You're going to keep that 60% to get your lungs pumped, your heart going. It's survival, right? So you kind of, when healing starts to happen, you start to see those kinds of things come in. And a lot of times the kids are very short. They're short in stature. So when's he going to talk? I don't know. Is he growing? Oh, yeah, he is growing. Or are his feet growing? Yeah, it's funny. His feet, I haven't talked to you for 2 months, Mary, and his feet have grown, a size and a half. Did his teeth fall out? Yeah, he's got 2 loose teeth. So these are the things. And then once the parent starts to understand this, it really makes sense. It's the most logical program. Once you back engineer it and really think about it, it just totally makes sense what Dr. Reckeweg figured out, back in 1952.
Wow, amazing. And I have to say, I've been saying this about my son for many years. For our listeners out there, my son is 7 years old and he is still non-speaking, and we are very much still like in the thick of things around here. So something that I noticed several years ago was that lack of breath control. Not being able to take a full breath in and a full breath out, or being able to blow a kiss or to blow bubbles. It was a huge revelation when he recently learned how to blow a whistle, because we were just like, wow. So
Wow.
I'm talking to his speech therapist about this, because that was really the only resource that we had for years, right? Like following that kind of like mainstream model. And none of them knew what to do about it. Like, I'm like, okay, well, he's not breathing. How do we get him to breathe? Well, we don't know, or I'll look into it, and you never hear anything back. This is the first time that I've ever heard somebody like mention that. So, wow. Thank you
And,
for that.
and also, oh, sure. And that kind of triggered in me I think the beauty of what PX docs can do too. They just know how to open up the diaphragm. They know how to get that vagus nerve working. I just feel like what homotoxicology does, I feel like the PX docs, they get it, and it kind of goes hand in hand, and it makes everything just work faster. Yeah, but in my opinion too, speech therapy, it's just it's too advanced for our kids. We have to get
Yes.
more foundational.
Yes.
So and it's hard to find out what that foundation is, and we're all still learning. I mean, I'm learning from you. I'm still learning after 34 years. I'm learning from so many different parents and practitioners too. There's some really great ones coming down the pike. Because the goal is to get the kids as healthy as possible so that they can run with the ball as hard and as fast as they can. At the end of the day, they're going to have to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, could you tell us a little bit about the Real Child Center?
So the Real Child Center, I started that back in 2008, and I was working with a homeopath who was with me, Kathleen, part-time, and my assistant Amy, and we sort of worked virtually. We had an acupuncturist across the hall that we refer people to, but within that diet, the model of bioregulatory medicine, where you have to work on all those other three levels, we just were always, once they're ready, we kind of sent them off to the next group of people or the next practitioner we thought that was going to be, helpful. And then COVID happened, and then it was hard to get the kids to come into the city. And so we have a house here in Connecticut, so I just came up here, and now I just do televisits. But I still am friendly with a lot of the doctors and practitioners and the different therapies, and I'm still learning about new therapies. And the parents are always telling me, like, they tried something and what worked. If they're ready for stem cells and they got a bang for their buck on that one, or they weren't ready for it and they did it too soon, or MERT, the transcranial stimulation. I find that can be really helpful, but again, you're going to have a better result if you are in better shape. But that's sort of where the Real Child Center kind of happened, was in New York City.
Oh my God, thank you so much. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Like my son has done the transcranial magnetic stimulation 2 times. Once when he was 5 and once when he was 7. And from just the changes that we made and diet and lifestyle in between those 2 years, what a difference it made. And yeah, back to that like 3D and speech thing. Before TMS, I really don't think he was able to perceive like 3-dimensional space. So yeah, interesting. So it's still no speech or anything like that. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's fine. There's other modalities. And thank God for that, like
Yeah.
ABC and spelling to communicate, the rapid prompting method. There's so much out there for them. So I know a lot of the time as parents, yeah, we are kind of preoccupied with like, well, I want them to talk. But there's so many other pieces to this of their health that we can do to like improve their quality of life. And yeah, thank you. And Mary, are you accepting new clients at this time still?
I am. I'm kind of semi-retired, but I'm busier than ever. But yes, I definitely am still seeing people, and yeah, I love working with with young. Not too the older kids. I usually will suggest that they see another practitioner that works with adults. But yeah, I still am working with kids, and yeah.
Oh, what's
Yeah.
the best
And
way for us to get in touch with you?
my website is realchildcenter.com, www.realchildcenter.com, and my email is wellnessny@realchildcenter.com, all spelled out. You can look at the resources, some of the interviews I've done, and also that book, Bioregulatory Medicine, that you can get on Amazon. For 2 of the 4 doctors I studied with, I've taken classes from them, Dr. Tom and Dr. Odell. They're amazing naturopathic doctors. But if anybody's really interested in kind of learning about this on a deeper level, it's really written for the layperson that's savvy. So that sounds like I know your audience here. I think that they would really get a lot out of that book. And so, it all comes down to being the best consumer as possible for our children, because these therapies, can be extremely expensive. So if they work, we're always happy, right?
Yes.
But if
Yes.
we don't get a good effect, you don't want to lose that amount of money for another therapy that might have been more effective. So I just feel like, that model, if you kind of understand that model, you kind of know when to start putting things in.
Yes, absolutely. And my last question, I guess, would be if there was one piece of advice that you could give to autistic families, what would it be?
Um, Always assume competence. Just because they're not talking at you or looking at you, they're picking up everything and they remember everything. And you will find that out. If your child never acquires language to the mouth, when they start doing RPM, they will be talking about it.
Yeah.
So they do. They're very, very intelligent. They're really amazing, brilliant young people, and it's a joy to get to know your child. And don't ever give up, and don't ever assume that they're a lost cause, because they're absolutely not.
Wow. Totally agree. Mary, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. I feel like we could probably talk all day long, but I thank you for taking the time. And I also wanted to thank all of our listeners. We will see you in the next episode.
Thank you.